ETFs are some of the best investment that you can do on the stock market by diversifying your risk and at the same time achieving some potential high return. And what is even better is that some of these ETFs are actually investing in some dividend companies which are giving some great passive income to their shareholders. And those are called dividend ETFs. Compared to the usual growth ETFs where the fund managers are investing in companies with some high potential of growth, the fund managers of the dividend ETFs are actually investing into solid companies that are more stable and that are giving some great sustainable dividend to their shareholders. So if you're someone that is looking for some great stability in your portfolio, but that you're also looking to receive some great and interesting passive income, well, this video is perfect for you. In this video, I will share with you what are the top 5 best dividend ETFs that you can buy right now in 2022. But before to continue, you might be wondering, but how does the dividend ETFs are paying their dividends to their holders? In fact, as you might probably know, all the different companies into the dividend ETFs are actually paying some dividends to their shareholders that are sometimes paid not at the same date. So it could make it pretty harder for the dividend ETF itself to pay a dividend each time that they receive the dividend. What they are usually doing is that they are paying a distribution on the income that they have received from the dividend. Basically, they receive the cash from the companies, and after they just hold the cash and reinvest it, and at a certain period of the year they will just give it to the holders of the fund. And usually the distribution is made quarterly. Now that you have discovered what is a dividend ETF and that you know that it could be a great option for you, let's take a look at my pick number 1. The first ETF that I'm about to share with you is actually one of my favorite because of the high quality of the companies that it holds in the fund, but it's also one of the favorite ETF of all the different dividend investors all around the world. I'm actually talking about the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF with the ticker SCHD. The objective of this ETF is to track the performance of the Dow Jones US Dividend Index, which is an index designed to measure the performance of high dividend yield stocks in the US with a record of consistently paying dividends to their shareholders. As you can see, some of its biggest holdings are some well-known companies like Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and Cisco. Also, another interesting point about this ETF is that this ETF doesn't allow more than 5% of allocation into one company. This is also reflected in the sector ponderation, where you can see that the tech comes at the first place, followed by the financials, the consumer staples, and the healthcare. As you guys might probably know, the fees of an ETF will obviously impact the overall performance of the fund. And in the case of SCHD, it actually has the lowest fees of all the different ETFs on the market, with a super low fees of only about 0.06%, which represent about $6 per $10,000 invest in that fund. And with those super low fees, the fund has been able to generate more than 13.50% per year on a 10 years period of return. And this is way better compared to some of its competitors, but also compared to the S&P 500 that returns about 10.5% per year. And as you can see, this fund is also giving some quarterly distribution to its holders, and those distribution obviously comes from the income of the dividends. For any beginners that would like to start investing and that wants to generate some interesting passive income, SCHD could be a great option for you. The next ETF is well known amongst all the different Canadian dividend investors because it is actually one of the most popular ETFs here in Canada. I'm actually talking about the Vanguard FTSE Canadian High Dividend Yield Index ETF with the ticker VDY. The objective of this ETF is to track the FTSE Canadian High Dividend Yield Index, which is the index measuring the Canadian stocks that are offering some high dividend yield. So you can understand that it's pretty much the same as SCHD index, but for the Canadian market. As you can see, some of its biggest holdings are companies like Bell, Suncor, Enbridge, and the big banks. And this is pretty normal since the Canadian market is mainly focused into the financial, the energy, and the telecom sectors. And obviously those three are the biggest sectors in the ETF, with a massive 53% invest in the financial sector in Canada. However, compared to SCHD, we can see that this ETF has some slightly higher fees. Indeed, its MER of about 0.22% represent about $22 per $10,000 invest in the fund. However, what is really interesting about this fund is the fact that it's giving some great diversification for your portfolio. If you would decide to only invest in SCHD, it would mean that you would be massively invest in the US, but by investing in that ETF, you would be also invest in the Canadian market. And a big advantage of this ETF is that it's giving some great monthly distribution to its holders. For my third ETF, I've decided to present to you another similar option to SCHD. However, it is coming from another different fund firm. It is actually the iShares Core High Dividend ETF with the ticker HDV. Just like SCHD, this ETF seeks to track an index composed of high dividend paying US equities. However, one of the main differences of this ETF is the fact that it doesn't have the same companies in it. So right now you might be wondering, hey, but Louis, why does it track the same index but it doesn't have the same companies in it? In fact, this happened because the US market is so much wider compared to the Canadian market, but we can see that most of the companies that are in SCHD will also be in that fund. However, we can see that the biggest part of its holdings are located into Chevron, Verizon, ExxonMobil, and also Johnson & Johnson. However, we can see that the slight variation into the holdings of this fund compared to SCHD has been reflected into the sector of the ETF. Now, the healthcare comes at the first place, followed by the consumer staples, the energy, and finally the tech. However, with its slightly higher fees compared to SCHD, representing about 0.08% or $8 per $10,000 invest, this fund has still been able to report about 10% per year of return. It is still about the same return than the S&P 500. So this would be another alternative for SCHD if you would like to have more exposure, for example, into the healthcare sector. And just like its competitor, this fund is giving some quality distribution to its holders. My fourth option would be a great option for anyone that is looking for some growth in their dividend payments. Let's say that a company received a lot of revenue in the last year and that they are deciding to just grow the dividends because they have been able to accumulate more retained earnings. The retained earnings are basically the earnings after all the different expense of the company. And if a company has some great sustainable dividends, well, what they could do is to increase the dividends to their shareholders, which would be a great news for them. In that scenario, the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF with the ticker VIG would be the best option for you. This ETF seeks to track the performance of the S&P US Dividend Growers Index, which measures the performance of US companies that have been able to consistently increasing their dividends every year for at least 10 consecutive years. In this ETF, you can find companies like Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan, Visa, Coca-Cola, and Visa. And those are well balanced, obviously, between the healthcare, the technology, the consumer staples, and the financials. So you can actually see that the US market has way more diversification into their different sectors compared to the Canadian market. And once again, you can buy this ETF for only about 0.06% of management fee per year, which represent only $6 per $10,000 invest in the fund. And over 10 years, this fund has been able to reach a massive 12.50% of yearly return. And as I shared with you with my example, this fund would be very interesting for investors that are looking to invest into companies that are rock solid and that they are actually at their maturity, but that they are still able to continue to grow, which means that they are able to give some great sustainable dividends to their shareholders, but to encourage the people to invest in them, they are able to also grow the dividends. And once again, the distribution of this ETF is made quarterly. And finally, the last ETF that I'm about to present to you is great for the geographic diversification and also gives some interesting passive income to its holders. Here I'm talking about the iShares International Dividend Growth ETF with the ticker IGRO. This ETF seeks to track the results of an index composed of international equities with an history of consistently growing their dividends. This is actually pretty similar to VIG, but it is for the international stocks. And for everyone that wouldn't know, the international stocks are stocks from all around the world except the US. This would be a great ETF for anyone that would be looking to invest into other markets and to be able once again to invest in companies that are able to grow their dividends years after years. This is why companies like Nestle, Roche, and Unilever, and also the big Canadian banks are amongst the biggest holdings of this fund. We can also see that the financial sector is massively represented in that ETF with about 25% of the overall portfolio. And it is followed by the sector of the industrials, the healthcare, and the consumer staples. Also, this ETF has some super low fees of only 0.15% per year of management fees, which represent about $15 per $10,000 invest in that fund. Unfortunately, in the past couple of years, we've seen that fund pretty much underperform the American and the Canadian market with only about 5% of yearly return since its inception. However, in my personal opinion, this would be a great ETF to invest in if you want to reduce the risk of the market. And this would also diversify your portfolio by investing in other markets just like Europe. This ETF once again is also giving some quarterly distribution to its holders. Now that you've seen what are the best ETFs that you should buy at any time to receive the highest passive income, you might be wondering, hey, but what if I want to buy the different dividend stocks to receive the highest passive income? To see the answer to this question, check out the video that's going to be just right over here that explains to you what are the best dividend stocks that you should invest right now to receive the highest passive income as possible. And now, for everyone that is new and that would like to know more about personal finance, make sure to join the Noah family by subscribing to the channel for only $0.0, and I will see you soon. Peace!